let's begin at looking at some of the writing tools you might use as a beginner to do broad edge calligraphy. One of the first that you might be introduced to is a broad-edged marker. And they're very convenient and easy to use, but eventually as you mature and you want to expand your capabilities and different papers and different writing fluids, it becomes limiting. But it's always nice to have around. The next that I would recommend would be a Pilot parallel pen, which is relatively recent to the scene, within the last 10 years I'd say. And this is extremely convenient. It's a really excellent, well thought out writing tool. And I highly recommend this for anybody who's beginning to do broad edge lettering. The next one that I would say that you mature into eventually if you stay in calligraphy long enough is a dip pen. And with a dip pen, it opens up a lot of different expressive opportunities to you in terms of the types of papers you're going to be able to write on with different writing fluids. But all three of these are probably what you'll have in mind and be using for a lot of your calligraphic careers. As a beginner, I would highly recommend you thinking about using the Pilot parallel pen. I have a video separate from this one that shows how you can actually load this with a different variety of inks rather than just the cartridges that they provide with it. The cartridges are convenient, but the ink is very thin, and sometimes it will actually feather out or bleed out into certain papers. And so in time, you may want to consider loading the barrel here with a more high quality ink. But for right now, these are very accessible and I highly recommend. And then dip pens, this is a speedball right here. It's very reliable in the larger sizes. It's easy to find and buy. Another brand that you should consider is either Browza or Tape, and even another one, Mitchell. And you can get all of these at either John Neal Bookstore or Paper and Ink Arts. And I'll have that information at the end of the video. I'll be demonstrating today on a paper that has grid printed on it. This light blue is referred to as dropout blue or non-repro blue. That is, if you letter on this in black, then when you go to copy it on a printer or a laser copier, the camera doesn't see it. The blue drops out. So it's very handy. Also, in my demonstrations today, having the grid here is very handy. This particular grid is made specifically for calligraphy. Each of the dark blue squares is an inch, and there are 8 little squares to the left, to north and south and east and west. So each of those little blue squares is an 1/8 of an inch. Also handy to know that each 1/8 of an inch is roughly equivalent to 3 millimeters. And that's going to serve us well because I will be demonstrating today with a 3 millimeter parallel pen. So let's get started. Guidelines. Of course, you want to start with a writing line, a baseline. And so I'll be drawing on the grid right here with a permanent black marker. Now, then you won't want to do that. When you're drawing lines, you'll want to use a pencil, easily erasable. So for the camera, however, I'm going to draw my baseline right here. And of course, that's the line on which I'll be doing my lettering. The body of the letters will rest atop that. Now then, you're going to have another guideline to show you where the tops of the letters are. The way you determine that is you take your broad edge writing tool, in this case the parallel pen, and of course with any kind of broad edge tool we often refer to this as the nib. Okay, so our broad edge nib, what we'll do with that broad edge nib is this. We're going to determine how tall this set of letters is going to be. Today I'm going to be demonstrating italic. And generally italic is done at 5 nibs tall. Let me show you what that means. We're going to take the nib right here, and I'm going to get in a little closer. And this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to start right here and get the ink flowing. And I'm going to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as accurately as possible. And then, once that's dry, I will make the top line for my letter forms. And once again, I'll be using this broad edge marker so that the camera can see it more readily. You, on the other hand, should be using a pencil that's easily erasable. And so, the size of the nib is going to determine the size of your writing line. So this nib was 3 millimeters tall, and so 5 of these little stairways, or 5 little nibs, is going to be 15 millimeters tall. And there it is, 15 millimeters. So that's how we're going to determine the height of our writing line. And of course this is going to vary from style to style, whether you're doing italic or Carolingian or black letter or uncial. But we're going to start out with these terms. Here's your baseline, here's the top writing line, and then a line through the center, midway through this, right here. That shows where some of the action is occurring sometimes. And I'm going to first of all do this just in pencil, hoping you can see that. And I'm going to keep it fairly light like that so that you can get that. So this is the waistline right here. Okay? And you'll see when I give you a demonstration with italic how the waistline becomes important. Now then, you're going to have other letters that are going to ascend above the writing line here. And in this instance, I'm going to have ascenders and descenders, which will be about 3 nibs tall. And so, once again, if I would have done this a little more exactingly, we're going to come out like that. This would have been 9 more millimeters tall. That is 3 millimeters and 3 millimeters and 3 millimeters for your ascenders and your descenders. And I'll be giving you examples of that. Now then, another thing that happens is this. Sometimes you will have letters that are perfectly vertical. And of course, one thing that comes to mind is black letter, where they're very marching along, very straight and very erect. So when you have the guidelines here, very straight up and down on the grid, that helps. But if you want to do something that's italicized, that's slanted, then you're going to need a series of slant lines. And I'll often demonstrate my italic at about a 10-degree slant. So let me show you what that looks like. So here are all the sets of guidelines drawn. We determined that we're going to use a 3 millimeter nib, and we said we're going to do our italic at 5 nibs tall, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In shorthand, we'll often put down 5x, x meaning body height. And then we've determined that we're going to do 1, 2, 3 nibs tall for our ascenders, 3x, and then 3 nibs for our descenders, 3x. And so we have our line for our ascenders, and very often that's just about the size of our caps right there, and the line for our descenders, and this is going to be our body height from baseline to top line. Now in the center here, I've drawn what I call the waistline, and you'll see certain things happening, especially in italic, at this height of the letters. And because we're having a series of slanted letters in italic, we've drawn some slant guidelines too. This is just a token number. We could have a great deal more right here. Be more exact than when we letter. But this is just a demonstration. So let's go to the next step now that we know these terms. With the broad edge pen, the whole point of it is to get thicks and thins, depending on which direction you're holding that broad edge nib. Let's talk about pen angles. If I were to use this as my baseline right here, and if I would count 1, 2, 3, 4 little squares tall, and 1, 2, 3, 4 little squares wide, and then connect them, I would get a square. Now if I would take my ruler and bisect that square like this, as accurately as possible, it would look like this. And if I held my broad edge pen like that, that would be a 45-degree angle. That is, my pen would be held at an angle 45 degrees to the baseline. And if I were to use my broad edge pen to make, say, a letter E, then in theory, and hopefully in practice both, then the vertical stroke and the horizontal strokes would be the same weight, like that. And that's holding the pen at a 45-degree pen angle. So when you would like your verticals and horizontals to be virtually the same weight, you would hold your broad edge nib at a 45-degree pen angle to the baseline, like that. Another pen angle you'll see used in a lot of different lettering styles, such as foundational, some Carolingian, and other letter forms, is a 30-degree pen angle. To make a 30-degree pen angle, all you have to do is count 1, 2 squares up, and 1, 2, 3 squares over. And once again, let's draw a little rectangle. Now, using our ruler to bisect that rectangle as accurately as possible, like that. Then we'll have a pen angle that is 30 degrees to the baseline. And if I hold my broad edge pen up there, like this, this is what we would get. Because we have flattened our pen angle, over here we have a steeper pen angle for our italic of 45 degrees, and over here we have a flatter pen angle for, say, foundational of 30 degrees. Then by flattening the pen angle, what's going to happen is this. Our vertical strokes are going to be heavier, and in contrast our horizontal strokes will be lighter. Let me show you. I'll demonstrate right here. And once again I'll do the letter E by having my 30-degree pen angle. This will be somewhat heavier, and then these will be contrastingly somewhat lighter. And that's because we held that at about a 30-degree pen angle right there. So you can see the difference that the pen angle makes in terms of the weight of our verticals and horizontals. Here a steeper pen angle gives you an equal set of letter strokes, and here a slightly flatter pen angle gives you heavier vertical and lighter weight horizontals. If you're not on a grid, there's another easier way to do this to make a little checkpoint for yourself. Let me show you. Draw a circle. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can just trace a coin, and what you can do from that is this. If you will, draw a little clock face on it, something like this. There, and here. And then designate 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. Then, if you draw a line from the center of your clock face out towards 2 o'clock, here too, this should be 30 degrees. So if I held my pen to it like this, and then did my letter E, I should get pretty much the same thing as I did by using the squares on a grid. Heavier vertical, lighter weight horizontals. Okay? Just to take these to the extreme, if I were to hold my broad edge writing tool, my nib, dead flat, that is, going in the same direction as the baseline. That would be a 0-degree pen angle, and the effect would be that the vertical would be extremely heavy and the horizontals would be extremely skinny. So that's for a 0-degree pen angle. I'm just demonstrating that because you need to see what a flatter pen angle will look like versus a steeper pen angle. So this is a 0-degree pen angle right here. That is, I was holding it flat, same direction as the baseline. In stark contrast to that, if I held my pen as steep as possible, the nib pointed in this direction, this would be at a 90-degree angle to the baseline. Then I would get an extremely thin, weak vertical and a laughably thick horizontal, like that. So you won't see many letters with those weights. But you can see the contrast between holding the pen at a very steep pen angle, 90 degrees, getting this, versus holding it at a very flat pen angle, 0-degree pen angle, getting that, and that. I'll throw in one more pen angle because it occurs in some things like Romans and some Carolingian. I'll show you on the grid how to make a 20-degree pen angle, and all you have to do here is go 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then connect those to make a little rectangle. Then you'll use your ruler to bisect that rectangle as we did with the others, and it will form this angle, which will be a 20-degree pen angle. That is, this line is at a 20-degree angle to that baseline. So that if I now take my broad edge nib and hold it like this at that 20-degree pen angle, I'm going to get a thick vertical and once again even more contrastingly thin horizontals. This serves you well in a lot of Roman caps. 20-degree pen angle. That's our discussion on pen angles right there. I want to go over briefly how to hold a pen. If you look at the way I'm holding my pencil, just a nice relaxed feel to it. I'll back away just a little bit so you can see the relationship of my hand to the top of the page. So this would be as if I were just normally doing some handwriting. And then if we transition that to the position of how you're going to hold a broad edge nib, for right-handers, look at the way the relationship is of the broad edge pen to the top of the page. And so this would be a fairly relaxed way of going about doing this. Depending on whether you're writing flat or at a slant board, this might be altered a little bit, but this is basically the position for a right-hander to achieve the kind of thicks and thins and the pen angles we just spoke about. And I would get something like this. Okay. Now, for a left-hander, and you know left-handers, how the world is made for right-handers and how you've always had to adapt. If you kept the top of the page in the same position as you did for right-handers, you would have to hold your pen upside down and make these strokes go in this direction, and you'll be laughing at my ineptness in doing left-handed lettering here. Look at that, I can't even get a straight line. But it shows you how if we wanted to get a thick and thin here, my gosh, that's horrible, then this is the way I'd have to hold it. If I kept the top of the page like this, let's look at another option. Now, instead of having my hand hooked upside down to get the same effect as a right-hander for the pen angle that I wanted, I could hold my paper oriented so that the top of the page were here. And now I could do the same kind of pull strokes as a right-hander would have had at their disposal. Still, I'm just terrible at demonstrating this, but this is a way that a lot of left-handers will hold their pen. Another option is to get a left-handed nib, which is cut slightly differently. I'll show you a picture of that. And then in that case, you would be able to hold the paper in a little more relaxed position like that. A book that I would highly recommend is by Betsy Rivers. I'll show you a picture of it. In this, she discusses all the different problems and solutions that left-handers face. I really recommend this book. It's excellent. This is the book I would recommend for left-handed calligraphers by Betsy Rivers Kennedy, Insights into Left-Handed Calligraphy. This is the best that I know of. Here's an example of what a left-handed cut broad edge nib would look like to help left-handers more comfortably get the pen angles they want. In this case, it's an example of the Pilot parallel pens, but you can get them with most any broad edge pen as well.